So file header sap and dec I already mentioned. Also interesting here to mention is this one, the row.names argument. It can tell R which column in your file you want to use as row names. And how can you specify this? Well, suppose you want to use the first column in your file as row names, then you specify this argument and you set it equal to 1. So the value for this argument is an integer, the number of the column that you want to use as row names. This one is also a very important one, the na.strings argument. What does this specify? It specifies what missing values look like in your file. So sometimes you have missing values in your data. So some instruments, they delineate missing values as NA or NaN. Some instruments, they use just empty cells as missing values. So you need to tell R what of these things is used in your data. How? By setting this argument. So na.strings is equal to NA, for instance, if this is what is used by your instrument. If it's an empty cell, you set na.strings equal to an empty string. So you see an example here. Here I'm telling him that either B or C is used to represent missing values, but if it's an empty string, you simply write this. Why is this important? Well, if you don't do it, and you do have empty cells in your data, very often the import will generate an error, because he will go over these empty cells and he will think that your rows are not the same length because of the empty cells. And that's not allowed for a data frame, so he will generate an error. So you avoid this by saying here that the empty cells represent missing values. And then you don't get an error, but he will convert the empty cells into NAs because that's what R is using to represent missing values, the word NA. And another one that I often use is skip. So this allows you to skip a number of lines in the beginning of your data file. So very often, especially when you work with omics data, you have the data, but before you have the actual data, you have a few lines that say what parameter settings were used, what mapper, for instance, was used to generate a file or something like that, so that give more information. So you do not want to incorporate these header lines in your data frame, and you can avoid that by setting the skip argument. So what is the value for the skip argument? It's an integer, and it's the number of lines in your data file that you want to skip during import. And here, just to show you what it does, you can set additional arguments. If you want to use the read.table function, then there's an additional one that you have to set. Let's take a look here. So he assumes that the separator is spaces. It's a comma, so you will have to set sep here. And he also assumes here that the header is false, while we do have a header row, so we have to set header is true here when we want to use read.table to open the file. So going back here, sep is this, comma, header is true. And here, just to show you what it does, here I'm going to use the first column as row names. That's how it works. So the first column in the file will become row names. And here I'm telling him that missing values are represented by either a B or a C in this file. So you can specify multiple representations of missing values. What is also different here is I don't use file.choose, but I use the name of the file. So for the whole training, I assume that there's a folder called R data, because I will send you a zip file, and when you unzip it, it will generate a folder R data with all the input files. So if you have set your working directory to the folder that contains the R data folder, where R data contains Galileo, you have to specify it like this. So go to the working directory. In the working directory, search for the R data folder, and in that R data folder, open the file galileo.csv. If you use this as a working directory, so directly the one that contains Galileo, you can remove this. So you would have to write this. Go to your working directory and open the Galileo file. Okay, so I have set it here, the folder that contains our data, so I have to keep that. So you have to adjust it depending on how you set your working directory. Okay, let's run this one. Here we are. Galileo has one column now. Let's take a look. Why? Well, because I used the first one as row names. That's this thing.